The wind whispered through the elm trees that lined the narrow road to Brookfield General, rustling the leaves like secrets too scared to speak. Inside room 206, a frail 6-year-old girl lay curled beneath crisp white sheets, her frame barely making a dent in the mattress. Her eyes, an unsettling shade of sky blue, stared straight ahead, unblinking, as though frozen on a memory that wouldn't let her go. Nurse Lillian Hayes paused beside the child's bed. She had seen bruises before, countless of them over her 25 years as a pediatric trauma nurse, but there was something different about this one. Not just the bruises themselves, but the silence that surrounded them. "Sweetheart," she said gently, brushing a curl from the girl's cheek. "Can you tell me your name again?" The girl didn't respond at first. Then, in a soft, hollow voice, she whispered, "Mira Collins." Lillian smiled, though concern remained etched in the corners of her mouth. "That's a pretty name. Are you feeling any pain?" Mira slowly nodded, more in spirit than motion. Lillian moved to adjust the IV drip as Mira's small lips parted again, voice barely audible. "My teacher lives under the backyard." The words hung in the air like fog. Lillian blinked, pausing mid-motion. "What was that, honey?" Mira's gaze shifted to the window. "Miss Ava, she promised she'd take me away one day, but she's in the backyard now, sleeping under the flowers." Lillian's stomach turned. The words were spoken without emotion, without drama. Just as if Mira were describing the color of the walls or the weather outside. "Sleeping under the flowers?" Mira nodded. "We had daisies there. Before. The weight of that single word settled heavily in Lillian's chest. "I saw. Mama put her there. It was dark. She used the digging stick." Lillian swallowed hard. She couldn't bring herself to ask anything else right then. The child's pulse was already fragile, and her voice trembled with an old fear. She excused herself calmly, stepping out into the hallway where Dr. Ellis was reviewing another patient's chart. "You need to call social services," she said quietly but firmly. "Is it that bad?" he asked, concern lifting his brows. "She just told me her teacher is buried in her backyard." Dr. Ellis didn't speak right away. Then he slowly closed, the file in his hands. "Call the sheriff, too." The town of Pembroke hadn't made the news in years. It was a place where people left their doors unlocked, where the grocery clerk knew everyone's birthday, and the loudest argument in recent memory had involved someone painting their fence teal instead of white. So when Sheriff Alan Briggs received the call from Brookfield General, he hesitated a moment before replying. "You're serious?" "She said her mother buried her teacher in the backyard," the nurse repeated. "She wasn't frightened. She was resigned." Briggs sighed. "Send me the address. I'll head there myself." Back in room 206, Mira was being visited by another nurse who brought her warm soup and a small stuffed bunny with a blue ribbon. Mira touched the bunny gently, not smiling, just observing. The nurse asked her if she wanted to draw something, and Mira nodded faintly. She took the crayon and paper but didn't start drawing right away. Her hand hovered over the page for a long while. Then slowly she began sketching a rectangle, then another beneath it. A figure with curly hair above ground. Another one under the rectangle, underneath what looked like a flower bed. "Mira, is this your house?" the nurse asked carefully. Mira nodded. "Who's this under the flowers?" "Miss Ava. She's not cold, though. Mama said the earth keeps people warm." The nurse's hand trembled just slightly as she placed the drawing aside and left the room. At the edge of town, just past the post office and the bakery, sat a modest cottage with faded blue shutters and an overgrown backyard that had once been lovely. Now the flower beds looked haphazard, as if planted in a hurry. Sheriff Briggs stood at the gate, looking at the swing set with one rusted chain and a lonely pink shoe nearby. He knocked twice before the door opened. A woman in her early 40s peered out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sheriff?" she said with a surprised smile. "Can I help you?" "Are you Mrs. Collins?" "Yes, that's right. I wasn't expecting—" He held up a hand. Just a few questions, ma'am, about your daughter. The woman's smile tightened. Is something wrong? Not necessarily, just need to verify a few things. Inside the home, everything was tidy. Too tidy. The walls were bare except for a calendar and a family photo. Mira as a baby in her mother's lap. No sign of a father. Sheriff Briggs kept his eyes scanning as he sat across from her. Mira mentioned something at the hospital, he said after a moment. Something about her teacher, Miss Ava. Mrs. Collins's eyes flicked downward, then back. That's an old story. Mira. She's been through a lot. Sometimes she says strange things. You know Miss Ava then? She was Mira's kindergarten teacher, she said carefully. Left the school a few months ago. I heard she moved. Briggs tilted his head slightly. No one at the school knows anything about a transfer. She didn't file any notice. Collins folded her hands. Well, I can't say. We weren't close. Briggs leaned forward. Would you mind if I had a look around just to clear everything up? The woman's face tensed. Is that necessary? Just standard procedure. A long pause. Then a tight nod. He stepped out into the backyard. The air was heavy and the sky had clouded over. A faint breeze carried the scent of turned soil. Briggs walked to the flower beds. Some of them were new, too new. The soil darker. The daisies too neatly arranged. He knelt slowly, running a hand over the ground. The shovel marks were recent. Not enough time for the earth to settle. He stood and turned toward the door. I'll need a warrant, he muttered. Back at the hospital, Mira stared out the window at the clouds. They're like blankets, she whispered to no one in particular. Miss Ava said clouds are soft like her pillows. A pause. She used to read to me when Mama was angry. Why was your mama angry, sweetie? Nurse Lillian asked gently, returning to Mira's side. She said Miss Ava was going to take me away, and people who take things go in the ground. Nurse Lillian felt her heart twist. Mira continued softly. But I didn't want Miss Ava to go. I liked her stories. She always smelled like peaches. What happened the night she went away? Mira didn't answer. Her eyes fixed again on the clouds and her thumb found the corner of the blanket. She said if I was brave, someone would come. Someone kind. Someone who listens. The nurse couldn't hold back the tears this time. She quietly reached for the notepad by the bedside and made a silent vow to be exactly that. Someone who listens. Because sometimes, the smallest voice is the one that carries the truth. The first few rays of dawn hadn't yet broken the sky when Sheriff Briggs returned to the Collins residence, this time with a warrant and a deputy in tow. The soil under the flower bed had been tested overnight. Early analysis showed it had been recently disturbed, and that was enough for Judge Holloway to sign off. Briggs didn't speak as he stepped into the yard, only nodded at Deputy Rivas to begin digging. Inside the house, Mrs. Collins paced. Her composure from the day before had melted into something more anxious. She watched through the kitchen window as the shovel struck ground, the sound dull and rhythmic. With each scoop of soil, her breath grew shallower. Mira, miles away, had woken before sunrise. She didn't cry or call out. Instead, she sat up in her hospital bed and traced circles along the blanket with her fingertip. When Nurse Lillian entered, Mira looked up calmly. They're digging now, she said, voice soft but certain. Lillian paused mid-step. Who, sweetheart? The police, Mira replied. They'll find her, Miss Ava. Lillian's eyes widened, but she said nothing. She simply sat at Mira's side, her presence firm and warm. Some things didn't need words. Back in the backyard, the deputy's shovel hit something solid. Not stone. Something softer. Sheriff Briggs knelt beside him as more soil was removed. A few moments later they saw it. Fabric, a sleeve, a blue floral dress. Briggs closed his eyes briefly. Then he stood and called for forensics. Hours later, the remains were officially identified as Ava Langdon, age 30, kindergarten teacher at Brookfield Elementary. The autopsy would follow, but even now the shallow depth of the grave, the wrapped arms and the lack of defensive wounds told part of the story. That same evening, Mrs. Collins was taken into custody. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just looked at the ground and whispered, "She was going to take her from me." Sheriff Briggs stood in the doorway as she was led out, her slippers brushing the floor. She said I wasn't enough, said Mira needed saving. But I was her mother. The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It was heartbreak. News spread quickly in the small town. A vigil was held outside the school where Miss Ava used to teach. Parents arrived with candles, flowers, and tear-streaked cheeks. Children who once sat cross-legged on colorful carpets holding crayons now asked their parents why someone would bury a teacher. No one had answers that made sense. What stood out most was Mira's drawing, now sitting in a folder at the sheriff's office, a child's sketch that had unlocked a truth adults had buried under doubt. Sheriff Briggs stared at it long after his shift ended. He kept thinking, how many other children whisper truths we don't want to hear? At the hospital, Mira began to eat small portions, quietly. But there was color returning to her cheeks and a faint light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Nurse Lillian brought her a new stuffed bunny, this one lavender, with a bell stitched into its ear. "Will I still go back there?" Mira asked one morning, pointing toward the window, toward the vague direction of her house. "No, sweetie," Lillian said gently. "You'll go somewhere safe now." "Will they read to me like Miss Ava did?" "I think they'll do even better," Lillian smiled. "But I can read to you until then. Would you like that?" Mira nodded and opened her blanket for the bunny to listen to. They read each morning, and each afternoon, sometimes even through dinner, books about gardens and stars, animals that wore boots, and brave girls who spoke when it was hard. Every page turned was a reminder. This story wasn't over. A few weeks later, a woman named Eliza Garner arrived. She was a child advocate from the county, with soft eyes and a calm presence that made Mira tilt her head curiously. "I've read all about your strength," Eliza said with a smile. "I think you're going to help a lot of people someday." Mira didn't understand at first, but when Eliza asked her to speak to a room of adults, not in a courtroom but in a circle, surrounded by stuffed animals and pictures on the wall, she nodded. "I'm not supposed to tell," Mira whispered that day. "But you already did. Something so brave," Eliza replied. "And sometimes telling helps others too." So Mira told her story. Not all at once. Not the painful pieces in detail, but she told enough. About the flowers. About the quiet nights. About how Miss Ava would read to her and bring snacks she wasn't allowed to talk about. And most importantly, how she learned to whisper the truth. The room didn't cry. It sat still, holding every word with quiet reverence. Months passed. Mira was placed with a foster family, one chosen with care. The Thompsons had no children of their own, but a house full of animals and laughter, and a bookshelf taller than Mira had ever seen. Her room had yellow walls and a window that looked out at real daisies, the kind that swayed in the wind but didn't mark secrets underneath. She had a nightlight shaped like a moon and a closet full of dresses. But her favorite part was the reading nook by the window, with a pillow shaped like a star and a stack of stories waiting to be read. Her new parents read to her every night. But sometimes Mira would read to them. She'd hold the book open carefully, her small voice full of meaning. She said clouds were soft like her pillows, she'd begin. And that brave girls grow up to help others. The Thompsons always listened, because they knew. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the strongest truth, and Mira was no longer afraid to speak. She had already saved one soul. Now she would go on to save more. The wind had a different sound near the Thompsons' porch, lighter, freer, as if it too had been holding its breath for too long. Mira sat curled in a woven hammock chair, her bare feet dangling just above the wooden deck. It had been almost 3 months since she left the hospital, but the passing of days hadn't erased her memories. Instead, they lived quietly inside, her like chapters from a book she hadn't finished reading. She looked up as Mr. Thompson stepped outside with 2 mugs, one for himself and one filled with warm apple cider just the way Mira liked it. "Want to go through your new book tonight?" he asked, handing her the cup. Mira gave a small nod. "Can I read it to you?" "You sure can." That evening, Mira's voice was slow but steady, reading about a girl who found courage in the smallest places, between stones, in the whisper of birds, and in the kindness of strangers. Halfway through the story, she paused, fingers resting on the page. "Mr. Thompson." "If I see something wrong again, and tell someone, will people believe me this time?" He set down his mug and met her eyes gently. "I believe you now, and so will the right people." Mira leaned back, drawing in a breath. "Okay," she whispered. "Then I'll keep telling." That decision, spoken under stars and porch light, would ripple in ways no one could have expected. 2. Towns away, Sheriff Briggs stood outside a courthouse conference room, a file in hand. Mira's statements, delivered through art, speech therapy, and storybooks, had led to the reopening of 2 previous cases involving missing persons from Brookfield Elementary. No one had connected the disappearances to the Collins household until Mira whispered about the garden room and the door behind the fireplace. Her words had unearthed more than just Ava Langdon's resting place. With Mira now in safe hands, other children began to speak too. Students who'd once been quiet suddenly mentioned extra time at the Collins home, or how they were told not to tell their parents about certain visits. What had been seen as kindness from a devoted mother figure was revealed to be something much darker, something twisted behind manicured lawns and polite smiles. The case was expanding, and Mira, without knowing it, had opened the floodgates to truth. At school, Mira walked slowly through her new classroom. The desks were brighter, the teacher younger, with kind freckles and funny earrings shaped like tiny pencils. Still, Mira hesitated at the doorway until the teacher knelt down. "Would you like to come in with me, Mira?" she asked, holding out a hand. The little girl's eyes searched hers, looking for something no adult could fake: safety. She took the teacher's hand. By midweek, Mira was drawing again, this time pictures of rainbows and bookshops, not buried, gardens. Her stories, once filled with shadows, now danced with animals and soft sunrises. At recess, a boy named Jonah shared his snack with her. He didn't ask why she was quiet. He just offered half a cheese stick and sat beside her until the bell rang. Friendship, Mira was learning, didn't need explanations. On the local news, Mira's story was shared, carefully, respectfully, by a journalist who had once covered school events and had known Ava Langdon personally. She didn't use names, just called her a brave little girl who spoke when it mattered. The town responded in kind. Letters arrived at the Thompson home. Strangers wrote about how Mira's strength reminded them to listen better, to pay attention to the quiet ones, the gentle ones, the ones who flinched at questions. Children drew her pictures, some with hearts, others with messages like, "You're my hero," or "You saved your teacher." Mira read each one. She didn't always reply, but she kept them all in a big yellow envelope under her bed. "You think they mean it?" she asked Mrs. Thompson one evening. Mrs. Thompson tucked a strand of hair behind Mira's ear. "I know they do. But what matters more is that you believed in your own voice first." That thought stuck with her, like the final page of a good book. In therapy, Mira began to write. Not full sentences, just fragments at first, memories and hopes. Her therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Elise, encouraged her to build her own story, not one about what happened, but one about who Mira wanted to be. One day, Mira brought in a crumpled paper and read it aloud. "When I grow up, I want to help children who feel scared. I want to find the quiet ones like me. I want to be someone who hears them. I think I want to be something like Miss Ava." Dr. Elise smiled and wrote one word on the board: advocate. "That's what it's called," she said. "Someone who uses their voice for others." Mira nodded, and for the first time in a long time, her smile reached her eyes. Spring arrived with daffodils and longer days. Mira's world, once dim and narrow, had expanded. The Thompson backyard became a place of healing. Each Saturday they planted something new: tomatoes, sunflowers, herbs that smelled like lemon. But one day Mira surprised them. "I want to plant a tree," she said. They asked what kind. "Maple," she replied. "For Miss Ava." Together they planted a young sapling near the garden fence. Mira pressed her hands into the soil, not with fear, but with reverence. And when the breeze passed through its tiny leaves, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." That night, as fireflies danced above the grass, Mira told the Thompsons a bedtime story. It was about a brave little girl, and a promise never to stop telling the truth, no matter how small her voice once was. The mailbox was stuffed with envelopes. Again, some official, some colorful, with hand-drawn hearts and glitter stickers. Mr. Thompson chuckled as he sorted through the pile, handing the brightest ones to Mira, who was sitting cross-legged on the front steps, her notebook resting on her lap. She glanced up and gave a small grin as he passed them over. "Looks like you've got more admirers," he teased gently. Mira traced the edges of one pink envelope and whispered, "Do they really mean all this? Or are they just being nice?" Mr. Thompson sat beside her and said, "Sometimes kindness starts as just being nice, but it becomes real when someone listens and learns from you. And Mira, you've made the whole town listen." That evening, Mira opened letters from children in other states, some saying they felt invisible at school, some sharing their own brave moments of speaking up. She read each one slowly, lips moving as her eyes skimmed the shaky handwriting. One letter from a girl named Lexi in Idaho read, "I told my aunt about my cousin hurting me after I saw your story. I was scared, but I remembered how you told anyway. Thank you." Mira's fingers shook slightly as she folded the letter again, holding it to her chest. The pain she'd carried for so long was slowly transforming into something that helped others. Across town, a new investigation was quietly underway. Detective Clara Mendez reviewed records from a nearby foster home flagged in the past, and Mira's drawings, now recognized as more than childhood scribbles, were being analyzed by forensic psychologists. Mira's map house, a sketch with red X's and little hearts drawn over hidden places, had already led them to uncover a second shallow grave near a creek bed, where another missing child had been last seen 4 years earlier. The pieces were connecting. Because of Mira, more lost voices were being found. Yet the media frenzy was starting to grow too. Journalists began knocking, eager to get a statement, to interview the girl whose quiet truth had shaken their small state. But the Thompsons always politely declined. "She's not a story," Mrs. Thompson would say. "She's a person, and she's still healing." And so Mira stayed out of the spotlight, but her impact spread like sunlight through blinds, soft, steady, and undeniable. Back in school, Mira's world was beginning to feel safe again. During art time, she painted butterflies instead of locked doors. When the class read stories out loud, Mira joined in, her voice still shy but no longer hidden. She sat next to Jonah every day, and they'd whisper jokes about the lunch menu or doodle aliens with 10 eyes. On Fridays, her new teacher, Miss Lorna, had a tradition called Hero Moments, where students could share something brave they'd done that week. When Mira finally raised her hand one day and said, "I helped a first grader who got lost in the hall," the class clapped, and Miss Lorna beamed. "You're becoming someone others look up to," she said after class. "How does that feel?" Mira thought for a moment. "Like I'm not little anymore. Like my voice is taller now." One weekend, the Thompsons took Mira to a nearby lake for a break from town. No reporters, no whispers, just trees, laughter, and fresh air. At the edge of the lake, Mira spotted a rowboat tied to the dock. "Can we go out there?" she asked. Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Ever been in a boat before?" "Nope," she said, smiling. "But I want to try." So they did. Mira sat at the bow, arms stretched wide like wings, the wind sweeping her curls as they drifted into the calm. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, she whispered, I used to think being strong meant keeping secrets. And now? Mrs. Thompson asked softly. Now I know being strong means saying them out loud, even if your voice shakes. They floated there in silence, proud and aching. Back in town, plans were forming for a new memorial garden. The school board had voted to honor Miss Ava Langdon and the other children by creating a peaceful space at the edge of Westridge Elementary. When asked what should be included, Mira didn't hesitate. A stone bench, she said, with the words, "Truth doesn't whisper. It echoes." And so it was. Months later, the garden bloomed with sunflowers, lavender, and white daisies. The bench sat beneath a maple tree, the same kind Mira had planted in her yard. Children sat there during recess. Some wrote poems, others just sat quietly, but everyone knew what it meant. They called it Mira's Echo. That fall, Mira was invited, privately, to speak with a small group of students from nearby schools who had also gone through hard times. She wasn't forced, and she wasn't pressured. She simply sat in a circle and listened. At the end of the session, a boy with short dark hair said, "You're not like anyone I've ever met." "Why?" Mira asked. "Because you made being scared look brave." Mira looked down for a second, then met his eyes. "I used to think I was just the girl who saw something terrible," she said. "But now I know I'm the girl who told anyway. And that was enough." The first snowfall of the season dusted the rooftops like powdered sugar. Mira stood at the window, her breath fogging up the glass as she watched children play outside, their boots crunching on the fresh snow. Jonah waved at her from below, a snowball in his hand and a mischievous grin on his face. She waved back but didn't go down. Not yet. Inside, the house was quiet except for the soft hum of Mrs. Thompson humming in the kitchen. Mira turned from the window and walked toward the small wooden box sitting on the hallway shelf. It wasn't locked. Mr. Thompson believed that secrets lost their power when they weren't hidden. Inside were clippings from newspapers, letters of support, and sketches Mira had made, some dark, some hopeful. She pulled out a new piece of paper and drew 2 trees, one small and bent, the other tall and reaching upward. Between them, a dotted line like a bridge. She wrote one word beneath it: becoming. Later that afternoon, she stood beside Mr. Thompson at the edge of Westridge Elementary's memorial garden. It was the day of the dedication. Families and teachers gathered, bundled, in scarves and coats, some holding flowers, others just holding hands. Mira's heart beat hard as she approached the stone bench. She ran her gloved fingers across the words she had chosen. Truth doesn't whisper. It echoes. Miss Lorna crouched beside her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've changed more lives than you'll ever know. The mayor stepped up to the microphone. Today we honor the bravery of a child who chose truth, a truth that helped uncover what had long been hidden, a truth that helped us all grow. He didn't say Mira's name. That was part of the agreement, to protect her peace, but everyone knew, and more importantly, she knew. Meanwhile, a quiet trial was beginning downtown. The woman Mira once called her aunt sat with tightly folded hands, eyes hollow and distant. The courtroom wasn't full of shouting or flashbulbs, just calm facts, carefully spoken by experts, detectives, and even Miss Lorna. Mira wasn't asked to testify. Detective Mendez had made sure of that. Her recorded statement, made months ago in a room filled with stuffed animals and calm voices, was all that was needed. Justice, for once, didn't come with noise. It came with stillness. With truth being believed, the ruling came quickly, and the sentence ensured that no child would ever be left in that woman's care again. Back home, Mira stood in front of a mirror, brushing her hair. She looked different. Now, not because she had grown taller or started smiling more often, but because something deeper had changed. Her eyes, once clouded by fear, now carried a quiet strength. She no longer whispered. During dinner, the Thompsons told her something they had been waiting months to say. Mira, Mr. Thompson began, setting his fork down. We'd like to ask something important. Her eyes widened. What is it? Mrs. Thompson reached across the table, holding her hand. Would you want us to be your family, not just in our hearts, but officially? We'd love to adopt you if you feel ready. The room seemed to hold its breath. Mira looked at the two people who had fed her, held her, protected her, and never once pushed her too fast. Her voice trembled slightly, but this time with joy. Yes, she said. Please. They all cried, a little laughing through tears. That night, Mira wrote a letter to Miss Ava Langdon. She didn't know where it would go, but she folded it neatly and tucked it into her journal. Dear Miss Ava, you saw me. You cared. You helped me be brave. I didn't forget. I hope the sky is full of stories where you are. Love. Mira. The next morning, Mira opened the front door to a surprise. Children from her school had made paper birds, hundreds of them, hanging from tree branches and fences, each one carrying a message. Thank you, Mira. You helped me tell. Because of you, I spoke up. The truth was no longer just hers. It had become a torch, passed from hand to hand, a whisper that had become an echo, loud enough to change the world. The adoption papers had been signed on a quiet Tuesday morning, but for Mira, it felt like the sky had thrown confetti. That evening, she sat between Mr. and Mrs. Thompson on the living room floor, unwrapping a soft blue box tied with a silver ribbon. Inside was a gold necklace, simple, delicate, with one word engraved in tiny, careful letters: chosen. Tears welled in her eyes, not because she was sad, but because for the first time, she wasn't afraid of being loved out loud. Life settled into a new kind of rhythm. Mira helped cook dinner, took care of the garden, and even taught the neighbor's toddler how to feed the birds without scaring them. Her laughter returned, not sudden or loud, but quiet and true, like sunlight warming the floorboards in the morning. At school, a special assembly was held in early spring. Miss Lorna introduced a new student program designed to give children a safe space to talk. It would include trained counselors, art therapy, and most importantly, peer support led by older students who had been through difficult times. At the front of the stage stood Mira, not as a victim, not even as the girl from the garden story, but as a leader. Sometimes we think silence keeps us safe, she said into the microphone, her voice steady. But silence can be heavy, and truth can lift it. Even if you feel small, your voice is still big enough. The crowd didn't erupt in applause. Instead, something better happened. Quiet nods, some tears, and the feeling that hearts were shifting. One boy in the third row raised his hand. How did you get brave? Mira paused, then smiled. I didn't wait to stop being scared. I just told the truth anyway. Spring turned to summer, and the town of Westridge slowly shed its shadows. A mural appeared on the brick wall outside City Hall, painted by school children and local artists. It showed a garden, a maple tree, a bench, and dozens of colorful butterflies. In the center, a girl's silhouette stood with outstretched hands, releasing dandelions into the wind. Beneath it were the words, "One voice can bloom 1,000. It became a symbol, not just of what happened, but what could grow from it. Mira's room was different now. Gone were the blackout curtains and heavy locks. In their place were wind chimes, shelves of books, and a window that stayed open most nights so the breeze could dance across her journals. She no longer drew maps of escape routes. Now she painted sunrises, open fields, and homes with light in every window. One weekend, she and the Thompsons visited the nearby lake again. This time, Mira brought a small glass bottle. Inside it was a note she had written to her younger self. She didn't read it out loud, but the words had been carefully chosen. She placed the bottle into the lake and watched it drift. It wasn't to forget. It was to honor how far she had come. On the drive home, Mrs. Thompson reached over and held her hand. You still dream about her sometimes, don't you? Mira nodded. I do, but now she smiles in the dreams. And what do you say to her? Mr. Thompson asked. I tell her, we made it. We're safe now. Years later, long after the whispers faded and new children ran through the school's garden, Mira returned. She had grown taller, her voice surer. She walked through the same hallways, this time as a guest speaker, invited to talk about resilience, truth, and choosing light in dark places. One little girl approached her afterward, her eyes wide, her voice a whisper. "Do you still get scared?" Mira knelt beside her, gently tucking a curl behind the girl's ear. "Yes, but I've learned something." "What?" "That fear doesn't get the last word. You do." And so, Mira's story, born from shadows, became a light for others. Not because she was perfect, not because she wasn't scared, but because she chose to rise anyway. She was never just the girl who saw something. She was the girl who said something, and in doing so, she taught the world what courage really looks like.